You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the continent to bring you the truth about cannabis and marijuana law reform.
I smoke pot and I like it a lot.
The Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation. Now, here's your host, Radical Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Monday, November 10th, 2014, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the show. We've got plenty of great content for you today. Coming up in the next 2 hours on the Russ Belville Show and Toker Talk Radio. We'll start things off with our 420 radio news. In the headlines today, we've got a new directive from the New York Police Department that may reduce marijuana arrests. We've got a boy in Chicago being charged as an adult in a prohibition-related murder. A Rastafarian student from New Jersey being profiled over his dreadlocks. A new TV series on MSNBC exploring cannabis premiering this Thanksgiving. And some news from the hemp harvest in Colorado. That's all coming up right after our first break when we get into our 420 radio news. Then later on in Behind the Headlines, we are going to be dedicating this show to the memory of a beloved activist here in the state of Oregon, Jim Clark, who passed away this weekend. We'll tell you why he was dying for pot in a medical marijuana state. Also on the show today, in drug war data mining, we have gotten the FBI Uniform Crime Report for 2013. We've got some fantastically good news about marijuana arrests in the United States of America to bring to you in that segment. Then at 5:30, we're going to visit with Dr. Mitch Earlywine, like we always do on our Cannabis Q&A every Monday. We'll take your live questions at 971-533-7111. And you can also get your questions in via our chat room to ask Dr. Mitch. We'll talk to him about the most recent study coming out in the Washington Post today about how marijuana use shrinks your brain. I'm sure Dr. Mitch has plenty to say about that. Also on the show today, we'll have time for a radical rant. What should happen to medical marijuana in a legalized marijuana state? We now have 5 jurisdictions that have both medical marijuana and legalized marijuana, and how should those interact with each other, if at all? That's what we'll be discussing in the Radical Rant today at the end of the first hour. Then in hour 2, Toker Talk Radio, we continue on with the discussion of the news today. There's a story in the New York Times about the use of asset forfeiture and the uncovering of some new videos showing how prosecutors train one another to go after the, quote, good stuff, end quote. Then also on the show, we've got our Roots Monday with Bacon Dan, who is going to be bringing us our daily Toker tune for Monday, a premiere song from the group Slater Kinney, who have reunited for some new music here in Portland. We'll talk to him about that at 20 after, 4:20 here in the Pacific time zone. Then as we continue Toker Talk Radio, we're going to discuss how California Democrats derailed their shot at legalization in 2010. And we'll wrap things up with a look at how federal prohibition actually helps the emerging marijuana businesses. It's kind of a different perspective, but I think you'll appreciate it. All of that's coming up on the Russ Belville Show here every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific time on 420radio.org. If you can help support the show, please do visit 420radio.org/advertise to get your business noticed on 420 Radio, or 420radio.org/donate if you would like to make your own private subscription donation through PayPal. Every little bit helps keep us independent and free for everyone who wants the latest news on marijuana in America. We're back with our 420 Radio news after these messages. Thanks for being with us. I'm Radical Russ. We'll see you in just 90 seconds.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
420 Radio is 24-hour marijuana.
Hey, what's up? This is Killer Mike, one half of Run the Jewels, and I'm telling you, November 23rd through 27th, you need to be at Cannabis Cup. I did it last year, and I got so high, I can tell you what color Jesus' furniture is. I got so high, I kissed the sky twice. I got so much enlightenment, I know Buddha's last name. Do you feel what I'm telling you right now? The people are great. You don't have to search or call your sketch-ass dealer who won't call you back. You don't have to go lurking through the hood to find good smoke. You need to get out of the country. You've been sitting on your block too long smoking weed. Get out and have an adventure. See you at Cannabis Cup, November 23rd through 27th. Yeah.
420radio.org is proud to replay Weed Porn Daily with Oscar Diaz from Florida. Weed Porn Daily is dedicated to bringing you a cornucopia of content to make your sober time harder and your high time funnier. Catch the replays at 12 Pacific on Mondays on 420radio.org.
Hey, this is Willie Nelson for Normal. And I smoke pot and I like it a lot. I learned a long time ago that marijuana is a lot safer than alcohol. There's nothing wrong with the responsible use of marijuana by adults. It's time we stopped arresting and started respecting those who smoke marijuana responsibly. To learn what you can do to help, contact NORML at NORML.org or call toll-free 888-67-NORMAL.
It's time for the 420 Radio News, covering the latest headlines in consumer cannabis, medical marijuana, and industrial hemp. Transcripts of 420 Radio News are available daily on our website at 420radio.org. Now, here's Russ Belville with your marijuana headlines in 4 minutes and 20 seconds.
This is your 420 Radio News for Monday, November 10th, 2014. The New York Police Department, which had been making arrests of tens of thousands of people a year for low-level marijuana possession, is poised to stop making such arrests and to issue tickets instead, according to law enforcement officials. People found with small amounts of marijuana would be issued court summonses and be allowed to continue on their way without being handcuffed and taken to station houses for fingerprinting. Under the current practice, more than half of those arrested for marijuana were released a couple of hours after being brought to a station house, according to a 2012 data gathered by the Criminal Justice Agency, a non-profit that assists with bail determinations. They were fingerprinted, checked for warrants, and issued a ticket demanding their appearance in court 6 to 8 weeks later. The remainder of those arrested for marijuana possession were, quote, put through the system, end quote, meaning they were held for up to 24 hours before being arraigned before a judge. A 16-year-old boy has been charged as an adult in the fatal September shooting of a 24-year-old man in a Chicago home. Pedro Corral was charged with first-degree murder and ordered held without bail by Judge James Brown in bond court Saturday. On September 5th, Corral and co-defendant Luis Alfaro arranged to meet the victim, Giovanni Galindo, and his friend at a home thought to be Galindo's residence. Corral and Alfaro asked Galindo to meet in order to purchase marijuana, but intended to rob Galindo of the marijuana, prosecutors said. About 5 p.m., Corral and Alfaro insisted that Galindo's friend let them into the home to examine the marijuana before they paid for it. After Galindo showed them the marijuana, Corral took out a semi-automatic handgun and shot Galindo several times, according to prosecutors. Corral and Galindo then took the marijuana and fled the home, prosecutors said. A Rastafarian college student from Colorado has sued Keansburg, New Jersey police, saying a May marijuana arrest was made after he was profiled because of his dreadlocks. Justin Cook, age 19, alleges that he and a friend were walking across Center Avenue in Keansburg toward a friend's birthday party on May 8th, the lawsuit said. 2 Keansburg officers stopped the young men, saying they were suspected of arson and narcotics trafficking, the court document said. One of the officers allegedly told Cook that he believed Cook had marijuana because of his dreadlocks. Cook did not consent to a search, but the police officer searched him anyway and found what is alleged to be a glass pipe and 0.77 grams of marijuana, the lawsuit claims. Cook produced his Colorado driver's and marijuana licenses, the lawsuit states. One of the officers later told Cook that, quote, everyone from Colorado is a pothead who should all be shot and killed, end quote. This Thanksgiving weekend, MSNBC will premiere Pot Barons of Colorado. The 6-part documentary series will air Sundays at 10 p.m. Eastern and Pacific, beginning November 30th, with a special sneak peek airing Friday, November 28th. In the 6-part series, audiences will meet a handful of the state's leading pot barons, including Jamie Perino, owner of Euflora, a high-tech pot parlor which she calls the Apple Store of Weed; Andy Williams, who co-owns a family business, Medicine Man, with his brother Pete, and runs one of the largest single-store marijuana dispensaries in the world and hopes it will become the Costco of marijuana. Trip Kieber, the president and CEO of Dixie Brands, hopes to build an empire out of his marijuana soda that comes in fancy brushed aluminum bottles. The documentary explores how each pot baron broke into the industry, the risks they are taking, the dreams they are pursuing, and the setbacks they must overcome. Even as Colorado farmers made history this fall with the first legal commercial hemp harvest on U.S. soil in 57 years, it's unlikely that much of their bounty will go toward the plant's diverse list of potential uses. Instead, hobbled by a long-standing federal ban on shipping hemp seed across state lines, most Colorado hemp farmers are squirreling away their seed supply, using this year's harvest as a source of next year's supply in an attempt to vastly increase planted acreage in 2015 with Colorado-grown seed stock. The federally induced seed shortage has already stunted the growth of Colorado's hemp industry. Last spring, farmers registered with the Colorado Department of Agriculture to plant nearly 1,600 acres of hemp. Yet seed shortages, poor germination rates, and inexperience with the crop limited their harvest this fall to about 200 acres, according to Zev Pais of the Rocky Mountain Hemp Association. This has been your 420 Radio News for Monday, November 10th, 2014. I'm Russ Belville. .420 Radio, the activist radio station.
The pistachio. Green, natural, and available without prescription in all 50 states. He's fine.
Salut mes amis, je m'appelle Marie-Jeanne et je vous invite à joignez-vous à l'équipe de High Times afin de célébrer la meilleure marijuana du monde lors de la 27e coupe annuelle du cannabis à Amsterdam du 23 au 27 novembre prochain. Pendant 5 jours, les membres du jury pourront participer à des séminaires, découvrir de nouveaux produits et voter pour leur variété de cannabis préférée retrouvée dans les meilleurs cafés de la vie. Les membres du jury auront aussi la chance de voir et d'entendre Action Bronson, Revolution et d'autres formations lors de la concert annuel de la Coupe. De plus, jeudi le 27 novembre, ne manquez pas la remise du prix du meilleur cannabis au monde par l'équipe de High Times. Découvrez le plaisir de la marijuana en toute liberté. Venez participer avec High Times à la Coupe du cannabis à Amsterdam. À bientôt!
Welcome back, everybody. 14 after the hour, and time for us to go behind the headlines. And the Oregon marijuana activism community, still giddy from celebrating our legalization win, was brought back down to earth with the news of the passing of the great Jim Clark. Jim was a fixture in the Oregon medical marijuana community. Every legislative session, he could be found at the State House in Salem, working tirelessly to protect and expand the state's medical marijuana program. Despite his extremely fragile personal health, Jim dedicated all the energy he had toward freeing the people who use this miraculous plant. Sadly, that did not include himself. Jim's liver was failing. For the 10 years I'd known Jim Clark, he was battling constant pain and never once using medical marijuana to alleviate it. Instead, he relied on the many pharmaceuticals prescribed by doctors that kept him alive, drugs that have the known side effect of being toxic to the liver. Wait, you may be thinking. Aren't I talking about a sick person in Oregon, the land of 1.5 pound possession and 24 medical marijuana plant limits? Why in the world would someone like Jim Clark not get a medical marijuana recommendation when he so clearly knew the benefits of medical marijuana and so obviously qualified for a card? Well, Jim did have a medical marijuana card for 9 years, but he never used marijuana while he had that card. Because in Oregon, and most of the states that passed medical marijuana laws in the first 10 years after California, there is no protection against discrimination by Oregon transplant centers against people that use cannabis medically, whether they have a medical marijuana card or not. I first learned about this phenomenon in the story of Tim Guerin, a patient from Seattle. Tim was a professional musician who suffered liver failure. Tim consulted with doctors on his condition. One recommended he used cannabis to deal with the pain, since it is non-hepatotoxic or harmful to the liver. Unfortunately, the hospital where he was on the list to get a new liver discovered this fact and kicked him off the transplant list. See, most organ transplant programs deny new organs to those they deem to be drug abusers. Their rationale is that organs are rare and precious, so they shouldn't be doled out to people who'll just abuse their bodies and end up dead sooner when they could go to a person who'll live cleanly longer. So Tim Guerin was told he could abstain from marijuana for 6 months, and then if he tested clean, then he could get back on the waiting list for a liver. Tim Guerin died within the next 2 weeks. 2 years later, I met my friend Ganja John. He was born with a congenital defect of the kidneys, requiring thrice weekly dialysis and eventual transplantation. He too faced the possibility of missing an organ transplant if he were detected using medical marijuana. But John beat the system by hustling up a prescription from his doctor for Marinol, the synthetic THC that is a legal Schedule III drug in America. He turned up positive in the drug tests, but with that little piece of paper and the fact that the test couldn't distinguish between natural and synthetic marijuana metabolites, John got his kidney and is thriving in Southern Oregon, making world-class hash oil for patients. But Jim never went that route, maybe because the tests are more sophisticated now and can root out the different legal and illegal metabolites, but more likely because Jim wasn't comfortable cheating the system. Now, I mean no disrespect to John. I'd cheat this Kafka-esque system too. But the end result is that one of the most legitimate qualifying patients died this weekend, having never used the medicine for which he fought so gallantly. Jim Clark went into the hospital shortly after our successful vote to legalize marijuana. He actually entered on election night. Jim's death shows us that we have so much further to go before cannabis consumers are treated as equals by our society. Our legislature and legislatures throughout this country need to pass a Jim Clark Organ Transplant Protection Act to ensure no deserving transplant patient ever has to make the choice between medical marijuana and a chance at a new organ. Jim Clark suffered and battled alcoholism throughout his life and told his friends that use of cannabis is what helped him kick alcoholism. It was that alcoholism that so damaged his liver. And he'd been waiting for a transplant ever since I met the man. I can't tell you how many events I'd been at with Jim Clark where I tried to pass him a joint or a pipe just out of habit. And every single time, without fail, he would deny it. He would pass it up. While everyone around him was using cannabis. Most people medically, some people like me, just because I enjoy using cannabis. And yet Jim Clark, someone whom even our opponents would point to as a person deserving of medical marijuana, couldn't use that because of institutionalized discrimination against cannabis users. Rest in peace, Jim Clark. Our condolences from 420 Radio and myself personally go out to your family and your friends on this tremendous loss. We will never forget you, sir.
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
It does show us how far we have yet to go, and legalization is just the first step. Legalization still leaves us in a Jim Crow state. Second-class citizens who can be discriminated against for employment, education, housing, even our medical transplant options. Keep on fighting. We'll be here for you. We're back after this.
420 Radio, the home of marijuana experts. Are you a hypocrite? If you live a closeted cannabis lifestyle, you are. Read about 7 people living a closeted cannabis lifestyle who are on the verge of coming out in The Hypocrites by Mara K. Eaton. Available at areyouahypocrite.net. You can purchase the book on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, also available on iTunes. Check out Mara K. Eaton on Facebook as well. Learn more at areyouahypocrite.net. The Hollywood Hemptress Hour, replaying Tuesdays at 12 Pacific on 420radio.org. At Herbie's Cannabis Seeds, we pride ourselves on bringing you the best quality seeds from the world's most respected cannabis seed producers, all at the lowest online prices. You can find Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. All cannabis seeds are sold as souvenirs and as a means of preserving cannabis genetics. Herbie's Seeds in no way intends to condone, promote, or incite the use of illegal or controlled substances. We strongly urge all prospective customers to check their national laws prior to placing an order. Herbie's Seeds at herbiesheadshop.com. Proud sponsors of the Russ Belville Show and 420 Radio. Arguing for the end of adult marijuana prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It is even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more in this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Welcome back, everyone. 22 and a half past the hour. And in the Drug War Data Mines today, we just got the latest data dump from the FBI's Uniform Crime Report for 2013, Crime in the United States, where we find that once again, for the, I don't know how many straight years, but I think all of them, drug abuse violations are the number one category of arrests in the country. 1.5 million arrests for drug abuse violations in the United States in 2013. Looking at the breakdown of all drug abuse arrests, 82.3% of them are for possession, 17.7% of them for sales or manufacturing. The FBI tracks the use of, or the sales, manufacturing, and possession of heroin and cocaine and their derivatives, marijuana, synthetic or manufactured drugs, things like ecstasy or meth for that matter, and other dangerous non-narcotic drugs, could include hallucinogens. And what we can find from these numbers is that marijuana possession, mere possession of marijuana, makes up 2 out of 5 of all drug arrests in this country. 40.6% of all those 1.5 million drug arrests were for marijuana possession alone. Working these numbers out, we find out that there were 609,000 arrests for marijuana possession and 84,000 arrests for marijuana sales or cultivation, making a total of 693,482 arrests for marijuana in the United States. Now, this is actually some good news. This total marks a 7.5% decline in marijuana arrests from 2012's total of 749,825, meaning there were 56,343 fewer arrests that occurred in the first full year since Colorado and Washington legalized marijuana. This is the lowest marijuana arrest total since 1998. And again, the 4th straight year of declines. In Washington state, court filings for misdemeanor marijuana possession dropped from 5,531 in 2012 to just 120 in 2013, according to the ACLU of Washington. In Colorado, cases filed in state court with at least one marijuana offense plummeted from an average of over 700 per month to about 133 per month, according to the Denver Post. Again, the fourth straight year of declining marijuana arrests in America. During Barack Obama's presidency, there has been an overall 18% decline in the annual marijuana arrest total. The number 1 and number 4 greatest one-year declines in annual marijuana arrests have occurred on Obama's watch. As for number 2 and number 3 greatest declines, would you believe they happened in the Reagan-Bush years? And that the 2 greatest increases since Nixon occurred during Bill Clinton's terms. Marijuana arrests are now within about 125,000 of reaching 25 million since President Nixon declared war on public enemy number 1, and we likely pass that number by March of this year. Marijuana arrests continue to fuel the greater war on drugs, with marijuana possession comprising 7 out of 8 arrests for marijuana. Marijuana possession makes up almost half of all arrests nationwide for drug possession, and marijuana makes up over 4 out of 9 drug arrests overall. Arrests for all other drugs remained virtually steady, increasing by only 0.6%, or about 5,000 total. There were about 16,000 fewer arrests for heroin, cocaine, and synthetic drugs, and about 21,000 more arrests for other non-narcotic drugs. Possession arrests for hard drugs make up a bit more than 3 out of 4 of all arrests for hard drugs. In addition to Colorado and Washington legalizing marijuana in 2012, Rhode Island decriminalized marijuana possession, and Massachusetts and Connecticut enacted medical marijuana programs. Currently, 128 million Americans live under medical marijuana and or decriminalization laws, while almost 18 million live where marijuana has been or soon shall be legalized. And you can get more information on these numbers. Again, all non-marijuana arrests totaled about 807,000 non-marijuana arrests, 693,000 marijuana arrests this year. The numbers are lower in the West, where only 18% of all drug arrests are for marijuana possession, compared with close to 50% in all other areas of the country.
420 Radio, fighting prohibition since 2012.
You know Herb Thrasher from the Herb Thrasher Flower Hour. Now get ready for Herb Age Designs for the proud cannabis consumer. Herb Age Designs, lifestyle gear for the 420 friendly. Herb Age Designs, we've got Frisbee golf discs and durable hemp gear. Herb Age Designs, we've got shot glasses, drinking glasses, coffee mugs, and beer cozies. Check us out on Facebook and online at herbagedesigns.com. And follow Herb Age and Herb Thrasher on Twitter.
NORMAL stands for Responsible Adult Cannabis Use. If cannabis use is causing problems in your life, consider taking a break or seeking medical assistance. Consider ceasing cannabis use if you have a family history of mental illness. Don't drive or operate heavy machinery while impaired by cannabis use. Cannabis use is not without risks, even though the risks are far less than those posed by legal drugs. The law offices of Omar Figueroa would like to remind you to stand up for your rights. If you are detained or arrested, treat law enforcement with respect and stand up for your rights by repeating, "I respectfully invoke all of my legal and constitutional rights. I do not consent to any search and seizure. I want to remain silent, and I want to speak with my attorney." Please contact the law offices of Omar Figueroa at 415-489-0420 or 707-829-0215 or on the web at omarfigueroa.com.
It's time for the Russ Belville Show's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Dr. Earleywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and a leading author and researcher on cannabinoids and health, who pins the Ask Dr. Mitch column for High Times magazine. Get your questions ready in our live chat or call in to 971-533-7111 now.
Welcome back, everyone. Half past the hour on a Monday, and that means it's time to get your dose of medicine. It's Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Hello, Dr. Mitch.
Hello there.
Welcome back to the show. And starting things off, we want to remind everyone that you can get your questions in right now to our live chat room on Ustream, or you can dial the old-fashioned way on the telephone at 971-533-7111. We always like to open things up by giving Dr. Mitch the first word on the latest in cannabis science. So what's up, Dr. Mitch?
Literally today, the Journal of Affective Disorders published online a study called The Association Between Cannabis Use and Mood Disorders, a Longitudinal Study. And the bottom line is, guess what? There ain't one. The major depressive disorder is not linked to previous cannabis use. In the giant NESARC data, the National Epidemiological Survey on Alcohol and Related Conditions, so this is the government's own data, and these researchers took a close look across 3 different years, and sure enough, basically smoking marijuana doesn't cause depression.
Good to hear about that. Now, I know when we look at the figures for schizophrenia or psychoses like this, one of the things we always point out is, there was a huge rise in how many people used marijuana, but not an accompanying rise in how much schizophrenia or psychoses we saw. Is that how they figure this out with respect to the depressive disorders, that there just wasn't the expected increase, or is there other ways that they tease these numbers out?
It was curious because what they often do is go, cross-time marijuana to depression versus the size of the effect going cross-time from depression to marijuana use. And there was some of that sort of self-medicating baseline major depression leading to initiation of cannabis use later. It wasn't a huge effect. The odds ratio was 1.7. But there wasn't that same kind of thing going the other way. So it didn't look like cannabis was leading to depression.
All right. We've got a question from our chat room. Bob would like to know if you have any information on e-cigarettes / vapor pens and what, if any, carcinogenic actions they might have. I guess this could be asked about the tobacco ones and the cannabis ones.
It's interesting because the e-cig literature is really small, and we're still getting data coming in. But by design, they don't have a lot of the respiratory irritants and potential carcinogens that we saw in regular cigarettes from before. So everyone's anticipating that it's not going to be as carcinogenic or even as irritating to the pulmonary system. But we just don't have the data yet. It's funny because these are all over, all over the internet, and lots of studies are out just saying sort of what they are and what they're used for. But we don't have any data on long-term effects simply because they're just so new.
And how about how they make these? I know that some of them are vegetable glycerin, some of them are propylene glycerin. Is there any difference in the glycerins they use and any health concerns we might have about them?
It's funny because, in fact, the amount of glycerin you'll actually end up ingesting is so small that a number of folks have told me it's probably not a big issue. But the key, again, is going to be, is it going to be an issue across time? And unfortunately, we don't even have 2-year follow-up data yet.
All right. We have a question from Speed Limit in the chat room who wants to know, following the election and the results in Alaska, Oregon, and D.C., what do you think the chances are the president and Congress will make a bipartisan effort to either reschedule or deschedule cannabis at the federal level?
Oh, I mean, I hate to sound negative, and I'm certainly open to the idea, but I don't feel like the contingencies are there for them. This isn't the kind of thing that's going to get them votes or get them money or somehow contribute to any of their legacies in the way they might want. And so I just don't see it happening. If if the recovery had been weaker or if the tax dollars were more dreadfully needed, maybe they would have gotten sucked into that. But I'm afraid the federal folks are still frightened, and as individual states finally fall, and it's pretty obvious that the majority of states are behind it, then they'll probably make the big switch.
Yeah, and how about looking even further forward till 2016? Of course, there's a presidential election coming up. There's likely to be 4 or 5 states going for legalization at that time, and no incumbent in the White House. How much do you think the marijuana issue could sway the elections? Could perhaps Republicans get the clue and go for younger voters by being the pot-friendly party?
Well, we've seen this happen in local elections, and it really has helped. And presidential elections are particularly notorious for big turnouts. So it would be adaptive on their part. I think the key is that they have to explain their rationale in a way that doesn't make them look like they were flip-flopping or waffling from before. I feel like the way Sanjay Gupta was real candid about, hey, I changed my mind as I saw new data, and to make themselves look educable and informed that way, that would be the way to pitch it, and I think it's potentially likely.
We'd have to get this past the party that currently on climate change responds by saying, well, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a scientist. So we'll see.
And of course, I couldn't read science.
If we tried. All right, let's go to another question in our chat room. Howdy y'all notes that Veterans Day is tomorrow. Are there any studies on the use of cannabis to overcome or cope with post-traumatic stress?
I have to toot my own horn here, and that Jamie Bowles and I just published something in Journal of Psychoactive Drugs, just looking at people's expectancies, and curiously, the high arousal and some of the re-experiencing symptoms, which are some of the most aversive of all, seem to be what people think cannabis will help. Some of the other factors less so, but clearly we've got a lot of folks out there who think cannabis helps. And as more data come in, I'm hoping we can fund a randomized clinical trial like some of the ones that have been proposed so that people could really, really do this and take a good look, because this is a serious disorder and one that's not going to go away.
And there was that researcher, Dr. Sue Sisley, who did she get picked up by UNLV yet? Have we had an update on that story yet?
Unfortunately, they haven't ironed out all the details. It sounds like it's going to go through, and I'm cautiously optimistic about it, but it didn't sound like the regents of that university had actually signed on the dotted line.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to have studies of marijuana. It might mess up all the gambling going on.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. There's a study I wanted to get, and I don't know if this is just the media repeating an earlier study that already come out, or if there's a new study that's come out, but the Washington Post today says the brains of marijuana users are different, especially if they start young. The LA Times was more sensational, saying regular pot smokers have shrunken brains. So,
wow.
Is this new, or is it the same old study?
I mean, yeah, as we mentioned last week, there were some new data on this, but you end up having to really look hard in a whole lot of different places to try to find those differences. No two studies ever find a difference in exactly the same place, which makes me kind of worried that this is really just a statistical fluke. If you look at 100 different spots, you're bound to find one spot that's different. And I'm never seeing these data sets really taking into account the fact that they're running so many statistical tests. I do believe the data on changes in brain function, and we've talked about that before. We do see changes in brainwave patterns when you're performing complex tasks, but we're not seeing genuine deficits in the actual task performance. So it sounds like the brain is plastic enough to handle whatever it is that seems to be changing in cannabis-related ways. Now, these data on heavy use early in life are pretty compelling. That ratio of gray to white matter doesn't seem to come out exactly the way it ought to, and it's rough on memory in the long term if you're hitting the pipe hard before age even 21. But I think this notion that marijuana is going to shrink your brain is particularly comical given the compelling data we have on alcohol shrinking everyone's brain, and nobody seeming to make the clarion call for that to be illegal again. Thank God.
Yeah. All right. We have another study that was quite interesting. This came out from the NYU Center for Drug Use and HIV Research. It was called An Examination of Opinions Toward Marijuana Policies Among High School Seniors in the United States, that discovered a third of high school seniors think marijuana ought to be legal. Another 28.5% believe marijuana should be treated as a minor violation, like decrim. And 10.4% of high school students said anybody should be able to purchase marijuana. They called this data from the Monitoring the Future study. But does this not portend a rapid change to marijuana politics as these people reach voting and legal age?
What's funny is, in fact, the way the Monitoring the Future study is conducted, I would suggest that these are actually underestimates of the true support for a legal tax and regulated market or decrim, because the students are filling these out oftentimes right there in the school and might be embarrassed to say so. So I do feel like that's going to go well. we've all seen those folks who, sat around the bong in college and were completely delighted, and then suddenly had kids of their own and kind of freaked out and suddenly got all prohibitionist on us. But odds are high this is the generation where that's really going to not be a big issue, and we could see a lot of laws fall, a lot of prohibitions disappear when these folks reach voting age.
Now that we have 5 jurisdictions that have voted for legalized marijuana, and all 5 of them also have medical marijuana programs, how do you think there should be an evolution of medical marijuana alongside recreational? Should it be maintained in two separate schemes, or should they be integrated somehow? What are your thoughts?
It's funny because I'm really not a policy expert, and I have a lot of affection for folks who need medicine and don't want to be gouged as far as the prices are concerned. So I can understand that, but I'm curious if there might be a way to make it so that everybody can go to the same store and have the same products available, and then there's a slight decrease in price for folks who have some kind of medical approval, and that's just out of the kindness of our hearts and how we all know that it's a good deed to help cure the sick, but that it's not completely outrageously more expensive for the recreational users too. And I think in the initial laws, we were often trying to bend over backwards to try to make it worthwhile to everybody who was going to vote, and we may have kind of messed ourselves up in making such a wide disparity between the medical and the recreational markets, and essentially encouraged people to go make up some bogus medical condition or go find some physician who's not necessarily going to press hard on symptoms. And that's not what we want to see. We really do want to focus on taking care of other citizens who are sick, but still providing a good market in cannabis in part so that we don't get undercut by the underground market.
Well spoken. Thank you, Dr. Mitch. Dr. Mitch joins us every Monday here on our Cannabis Q&A, taking your live questions on cannabis science, culture, history, and health. If you missed it this time, you can always call in next Monday, or you can send your question by email to 420research@gmail.com. That's 420research@gmail.com. Dr. Mitch, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you next week.
My hearty thanks.
All right, when we come back, we've got time for, what do you know, a radical rant on just the subject we were talking about. What should happen to medical marijuana in a legal marijuana state? Stick around, we're back after the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
You're tuned into the Russ Belville Show, the voice of the marijuana nation.
420 Radio, your ticket to the Boston Freedom Rally. Adam Hand of Handmade Apparel produces quality custom designs for t-shirts, hats, and other apparel. Handmade Apparel is the official design shop for 420 Radio, among many clients who rely on Adam Hand for everything from short-run custom projects to full-run clothing lines. Visit handmadeapparel.biz to browse the selection of handmade gear or to get a personal quote for your own designs. Handmade Apparel, a proud supporter of 420radio.org. In the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Russ Belville Show presents the anti-drug public service announcement of the day.
Marijuana use impairs coordination, balance, perception, motivation, memory, and judgment, which can lead to the risk of injuries and activities in sports. Marijuana, it limits performance.
This has been the anti-drug public service announcement of the day. To cure this sort of reefer madness, listen to the Russ Belville Show every weekday on 420radio.org. When you are starting up a medical cannabis business, you want a fired-up lawyer who understands the needs of cannabis consumers. The law office of Lauren Vasquez is your fired-up lawyer for the cannabis industry. Visit her website, fireduplawyer.com, or call 1-855-MMJ-LAWS for more information. That's 855-665-5297 for Lauren Vasquez, your fired-up lawyer, or email fireduplawyer@gmail.com.
You can't handle handle the truth.
Entirely legitimate topic for debate.
You have offended my family.
Hey, this is great, man.
And you have offended a Shaolin temple.
One major responsibility is to encourage people to use less drugs.
I know nothing.
I support a change in law to end federal criminal penalties for possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
We don't need no stinking budget.
Homosexuality, immorality general.
How in the century you have slurred the meaning of the words we, the people.
Be warned, this is not your mother's marijuana.
You could ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
I want to ask you a bunch of questions. I want to have them answered immediately.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Radical Rant.
How should medical marijuana and legal recreational marijuana coexist? That's the question before us in 5 U.S. jurisdictions now: Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska, and the District of Columbia, which all began by passing medical marijuana laws in the 90s. And that's right, D.C. passed theirs in 98. It didn't go into effect until 2010, but it is actually passed in 1998. So these states have all had medical marijuana since the 90s and now have recently passed recreational marijuana. And the way it's unfolded in Washington and Colorado leaves some people in the medical side very worried about how things will unfold in Oregon, Alaska, and DC. Now, in Colorado, it's not been as much of a problem. In Colorado, they've had a situation where their medical marijuana enforcement division, and for that matter, their entire medical marijuana system, was very tightly regulated and highly commercialized. By 2009, they'd opened up medical marijuana dispensaries, and by the time 2012 came around to vote on legalization, there were dispensaries everywhere, especially in Denver, and people could, get used to the idea of medical cannabis commerce. But what happened with Colorado is the framers of Colorado's Amendment 64 made sure that the medical industry that was already in existence got first dibs at the recreational licenses. You had to be a medical licensed facility to get your recreational license at first. And this led to something very interesting in that there were 2 completely separate and parallel cultivation and distribution systems for a fungible product. You had medical marijuana, where they'd have medical marijuana mother plants that would make medical marijuana clones from which they could harvest medical marijuana buds and sell them in medical marijuana dispensaries. And then you had recreational marijuana mother plants that made recreational marijuana clones that would produce recreational marijuana buds that you could sell in recreational pot shops. Now, the 2 plants might be the same exact strain, might both be White Widow, and both mothers could have possibly come from the same cultivar at some point. But the way Colorado's legislation worked out was to create 2 completely separate systems, to the point where many of these shops, these dispensaries, would open up with 2 separate doors, a medical door and a recreational door, to go into the same building, to go to the same counter that was separated by a partition, one side medical, one side recreational. Now, part of this was to maintain the fact that taxation would be happening on the recreational side with 15% and 10% excise and sales taxes, and not those taxes on the medical side. But the idea of having a seed to sale tracking system, 2 of them running parallel with each other, to me seems like a lot of bureaucracy, overlap, and inefficiency. Now, in Washington state, there was quite a different scenario, where in Washington state, they had the opposite of a Colorado well-regulated, well-commercialized medical marijuana system. Their medical marijuana system was still all wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Dispensaries technically being illegal, collectives being legal, and those definitions being massaged enough to essentially provide for dispensary outlets for medical users. The passage of I-502 then, it led to having one system that's highly regulated and the highest taxes in the nation at 25% at the grow level, 25% at the processing level, and 25% at the retail level, and state and local taxes on top of that, making an effective 44% taxation rate at the consumer level. This, of course, led to a huge disparity also including the fact that the recreational system was begun with far too few licensed growers and far too few licensed pot shops, so that we ended up with a situation where recreational consumers were facing prices of $30 to $35 a gram if the store had any supply, with many stores closing down in the middle of the week when they ran out, versus almost ubiquitous supply of medical marijuana dispensaries that don't charge that 44% tax rate, where instead of a $35 a gram bud, you might find it for $10 to $12. These two systems running parallel were completely incompatible from the point of view of the new regulators on the recreational system. How in the world would they ever get their $35 grams to sell, and how would they ever capture the majority of the marijuana market if it were so easily undercut by the unlicensed medical market in Washington state? This caused the legislature to propose some dramatic and sweeping changes to medical marijuana in Washington, much to the objection of the medical marijuana community. Now, fortunately, those things did not go through the last session, but they remain on the table to possibly be addressed in the next session. So that leaves us with a question. How should states roll out medical marijuana roll out recreational marijuana if there already exists a medical marijuana system? Now, I posted these questions and some of my points of view on Facebook over the weekend, and I received many complaints, comments, some very angry and hateful at me for even daring to suggest this. And to be fair, I understand why. Throughout the I-502 campaign in Washington state, the promise was made over and over and over again that I-502 would not affect medical marijuana. And then when I-502 passed, there were all these calls for great changes to medical marijuana that would eliminate most dispensaries, that would have really devastated the medical marijuana program as it currently exists. There were similar promises with our Measure 91. And our Measure 91 kept saying it affects the Medical Marijuana Act in no way, and in fact went further than I-502 did by explicitly protecting the Medical Marijuana Act. In 2 or 3 places in the Act, it says, does not affect the Medical Marijuana Act. The Medical Marijuana Act shall remain intact, so forth. But it's important to understand that when the promise was made with I-502 and the promise was made with Measure 91, they were made with respect to the language of the law that was being passed. And indeed, there was nothing about I-502 and nothing about Measure 91 that directly changes the medical marijuana laws. So that is not a lie. And the people that criticized it and said it was a lie, you're mistaken. There is nothing about the law that changes the medical marijuana in those states. However, there is such a thing as the situation or the scenario that happens once legalization is passed. And the scenario that happened in Washington state was having a vastly better regulated and controlled system for recreational than what existed for medical. I-502 didn't change medical marijuana, but it did put a big white hot spotlight on just how unregulated it was, leading many legislators to want to regulate it. Similarly, Measure 91 does kind of put a spotlight on medical, but to my view, in nowhere near the same way that Washington state did. And a large reason for that is the fact that Oregon has done medical marijuana far better than Washington does. Washington doesn't have a patient registry with cards. Oregon does. Washington allows naturopaths and nurse practitioners to recommend medical marijuana. Oregon does not. Washington state has a legislature that year after year has tried to gut medical marijuana. Oregon's legislature has expanded it twice. So there are very many political differences. And the most glaring one to me is the fact that Oregon has HB 3460, our law that just last year regulated dispensaries and put some order to that system. And yet, I don't want to see us turn out like Colorado did, with 2 completely separate production and distribution lines. To me, it seems redundant, especially when we're talking about a fungible crop. And furthermore, Oregon's Measure 91 provides strict regulations for the growers, making sure they're not using pesticides, making sure, there's the grows will be licensed and regulated, inspected by the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. There is no similar sort of inspection and control over medical growers. And I personally think it's untenable for us to have a system where recreational grows for healthy consumers will be better inspected, tested, and regulated than medical grows for sick people. Now, I know 3460 and the existing dispensaries are required to do testing and such, but that's at the retail level. Why should a medical grower be able to get away with growing with pesticides only to be caught at the retail level versus the recreational grower who wouldn't even be able to sell it unless it had already been tested? So to me, it seems odd to have stronger regulations for recreational than we have for medical. I think any regulation that would test, inspect, and protect a sick person is just as valid for a healthy person. So why not have one system of growers who are licensed, inspected, and regulated, one set of standards that are good enough for medical patients that will be more than good enough for recreational consumers? To reduce the paperwork, to reduce the bureaucracy that might be involved in trying to maintain two parallel separate distribution systems, and the absurdity of having brick and mortar buildings with two separate entrances for the sick and the healthy. I mean, that puts me in the mind of the colored and white water fountains of the 50s. It makes no sense to me for us to be discriminating between people who are sick and people who are healthy now that we have a regime that recognizes that all people may use marijuana. Now, I'm not deaf to the points of the medical side, that medical users do need more possession and to be able to home grow more. And that's why I do support the maintaining of an Oregon medical marijuana program so that patients that do need it can get 1.5 pounds of marijuana and can have 24 plants. Absolutely. I also agree that patients should not be taxed for their medicine. Now it goes into a bigger discussion regarding medical care in America altogether. But if we just limit it to marijuana, sure, there's no reason why the patient should have to pay a $35 an ounce tax. So why can't the Oregon Medical Marijuana Program card evolve to become basically a rebate card, a tax rebate card that also allows greater possession limits at home? I see no reason why we need to maintain separate medical marijuana dispensaries. One objection I have heard is the medical dispensaries might provide greater amounts of CBD type medications or more topicals or more things with medical application. But I've been going to the dispensaries throughout Oregon and I haven't seen that they've produced much more in the way of medical products than what you might expect at a regular old pot shop. And I think the medical demand will be high enough that recreational pot shops will still want to stock those types of items, the topicals and some of the edibles and some of the CBD, high CBD type oils. So let's not go the Colorado way and have two separate parallel distribution systems. And let's not go the Washington way and get ourselves in a position where our legislature is going to want to seriously gut our medical marijuana program. I believe if the people of Oregon and the medical communities and the recreational communities get together and figure out how best to integrate these two into one smooth, consistent system, not only will that be the best for the patients and the best for the recreational consumers involved, it will further make Oregon the gold standard of how to proceed in the post-legalization era. How the next states of California and Nevada and Arizona, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, and Rhode Island, looking at 2016, could have a roadmap on how to integrate these two systems and have them work together rather than in parallel. Because it's just one plant, and whatever reason you choose to use it is your own damn business and nobody else's. Let's protect the medical patients to have higher limits. Let's protect the medical patients to not pay taxes. But I see no reason why we should maintain two separate production and distribution systems. If you got any comments on that, we'll take your calls next at 971-533-7111. How should medical and recreational work together? Should they be completely separate? Should they be integrated? This is why we're here, to discuss these issues with the voice of the Marijuana Nation. I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for Hour 2. Got plenty of stories coming up. But until next time, take care of each other, tokers.
This is the Russ Belville Show. The Russ Belville Show is blogging and podcasting daily at radicalruss.com.